Hello, class. My name is Mike Winters. I'm a corporal with the Oregon Department of Corrections, and before that, I was in the Army for 8 years. I spent 56 months of those 8 years in a combat zone, both Iraq and Afghanistan, from deployments anywhere from 14 months to 18 months. I decided to do my project on veteran suicide and what the Veterans Agency needs to do to help change what's going on, the epidemic of veteran suicide. Between 20 and 25 veterans are committing suicide on a daily basis. PTSD is one thing that you'll talk about to any veteran, and they either know somebody who's committed suicide or they've been affected by somebody who's committed suicide. PTSD has had several different name changes, and it seems like every time they change the name for PTSD, they change the treatment plan or they don't have a treatment plan, and that's their excuse is that it's new. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline was established in 2007, and from then on, the veterans make up about 10% to 20% of their phone calls. After the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003, veteran suicide hit numbers up to 50%. Last year, there were 37,327 phone calls made to the suicide prevention hotline. Out of those, 18,214 were veterans, almost 50%. Now the suicide prevention hotline has a number that veterans can press, which is the number one upon making that phone call, and they can actually speak with somebody who's more geared towards the veterans' issues. PTSD is the number one cause of veteran suicide, followed closely by pain, chronic pain, discomfort, and most veterans complain that they don't get the access to health care that they need to help fix what they have wrong with them. PTSD is not new. It's been around since the beginning of time. Post-traumatic stress disorder can be something as simple as a car accident, rape victim, assault victim, anything that may have severely made somebody anxious or it was traumatic to them, and something will bring back those horrible moments that they've had. PTSD is ultimately an anxiety disorder, and the VA has changed the name from Gulf War Syndrome back in the Gulf War in 1990 in the invasion of Iraq to PTSD. When they made that conversion from Gulf War Syndrome to PTSD, they determined that they were going to change the treatment plan. They started using more medications. Nobody wants to be medicated. So the veterans are starting to disassociate themselves, compartmentalize their problems, and try to figure things out on their own. They also got a bunch of counselors and psychotherapists and everything from outside in the community. Instead of going the military route, veterans are more comfortable talking with military people about military problems. They want to speak with somebody who's been there, seen what they've seen, done what they've done, and gone through what they've gone through. It's hard to sit there and have a civilian tell you that they know what you're thinking about, they know what you're feeling, and they know what you should do when they've never done any of that. So the VA really needs to train their staff. I've been through the process myself. I was injured in Iraq in April of 2009. I spent 19 months at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. I spent 3.5 months of that on a trauma ward, 4 months in a wheelchair, and I never once spoke with anybody about post-traumatic stress disorder or any of my feelings or issues that I may have had. It was all geared towards my injuries, which were also neglected to a point. Better training is important. These staff need to know when they're bringing these people in on their caseloads, who they can talk to, who they need to talk to, what the veteran may be going through. It can be simple body language. The veteran doesn't want to make eye contact. The veteran keeps staring at the floor. The veteran won't look at them. They won't talk to them. They answer with short answers. I never was asked any open-ended questions. Most of the questions that I was asked by the case plan manager or the intake manager were yes and no questions, and that doesn't get the veteran talking. They also need to reach out to veterans who are high risk. Soldiers like myself who did time in special operations and who were on the front lines for so long, sustained many battlefield injuries, lost several soldiers, several friends, brothers. They are high risk. I've lost several of my friends to suicide, some to combat injuries, and two of my friends, I don't know where they are, and nobody really does. Reaching out to these veterans who are high risk has got to be an important process that the Veterans Agency needs to take on and figure out. And after that, developing a treatment plan. Once you've identified who these veterans are, there needs to be a treatment plan that's acceptable by both the veteran standards, the VA standards, and society standards. Medication isn't the answer. There is a way. I've done it myself. Through little help with the VA, I've figured out who I can talk to, what I need to talk about, what I don't need to talk about, activities that I need to refrain from, places that I need to not go, and put myself in the right position for success. It would help if the VA could get this figured out and start helping our soldiers coming back from war. PTSD is, like we talked about earlier, it's an anxiety issue. These veterans are in a state of hypervigilance for so long that when they're over there, everything is a potential threat. Every person's a potential enemy. And they get closer and closer to their brothers. Well, when one of their brothers dies, it's even worse. When the new guy dies, when the guy that gets there yesterday and dies today goes, it's not as hard as the guy you've trained with for a year and a half, told things that you wouldn't tell your own family, and then all of a sudden he's gone. In World War I and II, they called it shell shock. A man that disassociated himself. He wouldn't talk about his problems. They joked around, battlefield humor, and it was accepted. The 1,000-mile stare was adopted in Vietnam. Men that were, again, they'd stare off into oblivion. They'd be disassociated. They wouldn't talk much about anything. And they tend to bring in veterans. They'll hang out with veterans. They'll do things with veterans that they won't do with civilians because they understand that the veteran understands where they've been, what they've seen, what they've done, and what they've gone through. In 1990, they considered it Gulf War syndrome. It was the same thing. It's the same thing as shell shock, the 1,000-mile stare, and Gulf War syndrome, only now it's the Gulf War syndrome. It's the same thing. Like we said, now in 2004, when they started doing their big studies, they called it PTSD. They say, well, it's new, so there's going to be a treatment plan eventually. It's the same thing. I believe that changing the name is a cop-out. It's a way for them to keep going without giving the right care, without spending the money that needs to be spent. If they're going to send the veterans over there to do these deeds and do these things, they need to be ready for them when they come back. Anyway, that's my presentation. It's something that strikes close to me, and I'm hoping the Veterans Agency is going to do something about it and get it figured out. Thank you.